Picture this. It's a quiet Sunday morning in 2024, and federal agents walk into a small church in rural America not to pray, but to investigate. What were they looking for? Financial records, attendance logs, political endorsements, sermon transcripts. This isn't science fiction, this is happening right now, across multiple continents. In democracies we once considered free, from the United States to Europe, from China to the Middle East, governments are watching religious institutions with an intensity we haven't seen since the Cold War era. But hear us, what they're not telling you. The reasons go far beyond what you see in the headlines. Some involve money laundering networks worth billions. Others involve political manipulation campaigns that could swing entire elections. And a few involve genuine national security threats that intelligence agencies are racing to prevent. The question isn't whether governments should monitor religious institutions. The question is, how did we get here? And what does this mean for the future of religious freedom itself? Before we dive deep into this investigation, I need you to hit that subscribe button because what you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about the relationship between faith and state power in the modern world. Let's begin by going back exactly 100 years, because the seeds of today's surveillance state were planted in soil most people have completely forgotten. Between 1920 and 2026, the world witnessed a dramatic transformation in how governments view religious institutions. And understanding this evolution is absolutely critical to making sense of today's headlines. In the early 20th century, churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples were considered sacred spaces, literally untouchable by government authority in most Western democracies. The separation of church and state wasn't just a legal principle, it was a cultural firewall that politicians rarely dared to cross. But three major global shifts shattered that protective barrier forever. First came the financial revolution of the 1980s and 90s, when investigators discovered that religious organizations were moving an estimated $2 trillion annually across international borders, much of it completely untracked and untapped. Some of this was legitimate charitable work, but buried within those massive flows were terrorist financing networks, organized crime syndicates, and elaborate tax evasion schemes that dwarfed anything governments had seen before. The second shift happened after September 11, 2001. When Western intelligence agencies realized that religious institutions, from small prayer halls to megachurches, could serve as recruitment centers, planning hubs, and ideological training grounds for extremist movements of every variety. And the third shift, the one most people miss entirely, began around 2016, when governments worldwide recognized that religious organizations had become powerful political machines capable of mobilizing millions of voters, spreading targeted disinformation campaigns, and in some documented cases, directly coordinating with foreign intelligence services to influence domestic elections. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like conspiracy theory territory, but stay with me, because the evidence is overwhelming and publicly documented. Let's start with the money trail, because that's where this story gets truly shocking. In 2023, the Financial Action Task Force, an intergovernmental watchdog organization, released a report that sent shockwaves through global law enforcement. They estimated that between $8 and $15 billion in illicit funds were being laundered through religious organizations annually, using sophisticated techniques that would impress any professional criminal network. How does this work? Religious institutions in many countries enjoy special tax exemptions, minimal financial reporting requirements, and legal protections that make them extremely difficult to audit or investigate. A church can receive a $10 million donation from overseas, claim it's for missionary work or humanitarian aid, and then transfer those funds through a complex web of affiliated organizations, overseas accounts, and cash transactions that become virtually impossible to trace. In one case that came to light in 2022, investigators in 3 European countries uncovered a network of over 400 small evangelical churches that were collectively moving more than $200 million per year, money that was ultimately funding everything from illegal weapons purchases to bribing government officials in developing nations. None of these churches had more than 50 members. Think about that for a moment. But financial crimes are just the beginning of why governments are intensifying their scrutiny. The political dimension is even more complex and, frankly, more dangerous to democratic systems. In the 2024 United States elections, researchers documented over 17,000 religious sermons that explicitly endorsed specific candidates or political parties, a direct violation of tax-exempt status regulations that should have triggered immediate government investigation, but often didn't because of the political sensitivity involved. Why does this matter? Because religious institutions command a level of trust and moral authority that no political party or media organization can match. When a religious leader tells their congregation that voting for a particular candidate is not just politically wise but spiritually necessary, or worse, that opposing that candidate is tantamount to opposing God as will die, rewielding influence that transcends normal political persuasion and enters the realm of spiritual coercion. And here's where it gets even more complicated. Intelligence agencies in at least 14 countries have documented cases where foreign governments specifically targeted religious institutions as vehicles for influence, operations essentially turning churches, mosques, and temples into unknowing tools of geopolitical manipulation. A foreign government makes substantial donations to religious organizations in another country. Those organizations then advocate for political positions that align with the donor nation's interests, and the entire operation is cloaked in the language of faith and charity, making it nearly impossible to challenge without appearing to attack religion itself. Now, what do you think about this? Is this level of government monitoring justified? Or does it represent a dangerous overreach? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I genuinely want to hear your perspective on this. Let's move to the surveillance technology itself, because this is where the story takes a turn that might genuinely shock you. In 2025, leaked documents from 3 Western intelligence agencies revealed that governments were using advanced AI-powered systems to monitor religious services, analyze sermon content, track congregation attendance patterns, and build detailed profiles of religious leaders and their followers. We're really not talking about simple attendance counting. These systems can perform sentiment analysis on sermons to detect radicalization indicators, use facial recognition to track who attends which services and how often, analyze donation patterns to flag suspicious financial activity, and even monitor social media activity of congregation members to identify potential security threats or political organizing. In China, this technology has been deployed at a massive scale for years, with the government installing cameras and surveillance equipment in churches, mosques, and temples across the country, requiring religious leaders to register with the state and submit sermon content for. But what many people don't realize is that similar technologies, though less overtly deployed, are being used in democracies throughout Europe and North America, often justified under anti-terrorism legislation or financial crime prevention frameworks. A church in Germany might not have government cameras installed in its sanctuary, but if intelligence agencies flag certain keywords in a religious leader's online content, that institution can quickly find itself under investigation, with financial audits, interviews with congregation members, and surveillance that can last for years. The most disturbing aspect: much of this happens without any public knowledge, protected by national security classifications that prevent transparency or democratic oversight. Religious institutions that find themselves under investigation often can't speak publicly about it, can't challenge the basis for the surveillance, and can't even inform their own members that they're being monitored. This creates a chilling effect, where religious leaders begin avoiding controversial political topics and fundamentally altering the content of their spiritual teaching to avoid triggering government scrutiny. Is this protecting national security, or is it crushing the very freedom of conscience that democratic societies claim to protect? Here's what makes this even more complicated from an Islamic perspective. The Quran explicitly warns against the concentration of unchecked authority and the corruption that follows when power is not balanced by accountability and justice. Allah says in Surah An-Nisa that justice must be upheld, even if it goes against our own interests. And throughout Islamic history, scholars have consistently warned against allowing state power to infiltrate and control religious practice. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, established a system where religious authority and political authority, while connected, maintained distinct boundaries specifically to prevent the kind of manipulation we're seeing today. When governments gain the power to monitor, influence, or control religious institutions, they were not just threatening freedom, they were creating the exact conditions that lead to the corruption and oppression that prophets and messengers throughout history were sent to challenge. But here's what governments will tell you, and we need to address this honestly. There are genuine threats that require monitoring. In 2023 alone, law enforcement agencies prevented at least 43 attacks that were being planned or coordinated through religious institutions, attacks that would have killed hundreds or thousands of innocent people. Terrorist organizations have repeatedly used religious spaces as recruitment grounds, radicalization centers, and operational bases, precisely because they know these spaces have historically been protected from government scrutiny. Financial crimes funneled through religious organizations have funded human trafficking, weapons proliferation, and regimes that commit atrocities against their own populations. And political manipulation through religious institutions has undermined democratic processes, spread dangerous disinformation, and created social division that threatens national stability. So, how do we balance these competing concerns? How do we protect genuine religious freedom while also preventing the very real abuses that can hide behind religious protection? This is the question that governments, religious leaders, and citizens are struggling with right now, and there are no easy answers. Some countries have tried creating special oversight bodies that include both government officials and religious representatives, attempting to create transparency without government control. Others have implemented strict financial reporting requirements for all tax-exempt organizations, regardless of their religious status, arguing that transparency about money doesn't infringe on spiritual freedom. Still others have doubled down on surveillance, deciding that security concerns outweigh privacy rights, particularly in an era of global terrorism and transnational criminal networks. But here, that's what concerns me most as I research this topic. We're recreating systems of control that, once established, are almost impossible to dismantle. And history teaches us that powers granted for emergency purposes tend to become permanent features of government authority. The surveillance infrastructure being built today will still exist in 20, 30, 50 years, long after the specific threats that justified its creation have evolved or disappeared, and it will be available for use by whatever government happens to be in power, whether democratic or authoritarian, benevolent or tyrannical. I want to pause here and ask you directly, what would you do if you discovered your place of worship was under government surveillance? Would you change your behavior? Would you speak out? Would you simply accept it as necessary? Comment below, because these aren't theoretical questions for millions of people around the world. This is their current reality. As we close this investigation, I want you to understand something crucial. This is UNT about whether you support or oppose government surveillance. And it's not about defending or attacking any particular faith tradition. This is about recognizing that we're reliving through a fundamental transformation in the relationship between religious freedom and state power. A transformation that will shape the lives of our children and grandchildren in ways we're only beginning to understand. The governments watching churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples today claim they're protecting us from very real threats. And some of those threats are genuine and serious. But we must also ask ourselves, at what point does protection become control? And at what point does security become oppression? History is filled with examples of governments that began with noble intentions preventing crime, protecting citizens, maintaining order, and ended by crushing the very freedoms they claimed to defend. The question is on whether religious institutions should be completely above scrutiny. No, institutions should be immune from accountability when it comes to criminal activity or genuine security threats. The question is, who watches the watchers? Who defines what constitutes a threat? And how do we maintain the essential freedom of conscience that allows human beings to seek truth, question authority, and worship according to their own understanding without fear of government retaliation? I don't have all the answers, but I know this: silence is not an option. Whether you're a person of faith or not, whether you attend religious services or never set foot in a house of worship, this affects you, because the principles at stake, freedom of assembly, freedom of thought, freedom from unjustified government intrusion, are the foundations of any free society. If you found this investigation valuable, subscribe to Solvae right now so you don't miss our upcoming videos where we explore related topics, including how artificial intelligence is changing religious practice, the global rise of religious nationalism, and the economic forces reshaping faith communities worldwide. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Leave a comment with your perspective. And remember, the future is UND, something that happens to us as something we create through the choices we make today. May we all have the wisdom to make those choices with both courage and compassion. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and never stop questioning.